So, welcome to Speaking Opera. It's a podcast focused on opera. My name is Howard Hard. I'm your host today. I have a delightful guest who is returning to us, and I'm very grateful to have him back again because he is a wealth of information. This man is a conductor, a composer, a pianist, a vocal coach, and does so many things in life. And has done so much and is continuing to do things within the world of opera. Welcome, Benton Hess.
Thank you, Howard. It's good to see you again. Great to see you.
A question. What does a quartet of five mean?
Well, it means that I never learned mathematics very well, I guess. But no. No, I frequently talk about a quartet of five because it's the way that I got really interested in the history of opera. Um, I became obsessed quite a number of years ago uh, with a woman whose name is Julia Grisi, was Julia Grisi. She was born in 1811 in Milan, and um, I don't remember exactly why I heard her name for the very first time, or I read her name for the very first time. I don't even remember anymore. I just got fascinated by her because of this. Um, she was born in Milan and she started studying voice, as a lot of girls do in Italy. But she had a particularly beautiful voice, and she went to Bologna to study. And after she had studied for a while in Bologna, it was time for her to make her debut. So she went to Naples and she made her debut at the Teatro San Carlo in Napoli, singing in an opera by Rossini called Zelmira. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. So, in that particular production of Zelmira, Julia Grisi was making her debut, and so the role that she sang wasn't the principal role, wasn't Selmira. She wasn't Selmira. She sang the role of Emma, and Emma is was called a soprano role, but the role went all the way down to low F, below middle C, and a lot of sopranos these days don't even have that note. Usually the note that they're required to sing that's the lowest these days is the A below middle C, which is required in the role of Susanna in Le Nozze di Figaro. But for a soprano to have to go down to a low F is just really unheard of. By the way, in that particular production, that production of Zelmira, in which Giulia Grisi made her debut, the Zelmira was sung by Isabel Colbran, who was about to become Mrs. Rossini. About to become. She wasn't Mrs. Rossini yet, but soon she was. So anyway, in this production, there's a big duet between Selmira and Emma. It's beautiful. It runs up and down in thirds and sixths the way Rossini always does. It's really beautiful. But Emma has to go down to this low F, and apparently Julia Grisi didn't have any trouble singing this piece, so that sort of got my attention. Then I discover the very next thing that I learned about Julia Grisi back then was that Bellini loved her singing so much that he wrote the role of Adalgisa for her in Norma. Now, these days, we tend to think of Adalgisa as being a mezzo role. But as a matter of fact, you have to remember that Adalgisa has to match Norma, high C for high C in all of the duets. So we know that Julia Grisi had a low F and a high C. That's 2.5 octaves high. That's 2.5 octaves range there. Okay. By the way, Julia Grisi later went on to become a famous Norma in her own right. But for the moment, she was the very first Adalgisa. Bellini loved her Adalgisa so much, he wrote the role of Elvira in Puritani for her. Puritani requires a high D sharp for Julia Grisi. So D sharp equals E flat. She had a low F, she had a high E flat, one whole tone short of a 3-octave range. This is almost unheard of today. Almost unheard of. When Julia Grisi sang the role of Elvira in Puritani, the very first time it was performed, there are 4 principal roles in Puritani: a soprano, a tenor, a baritone, and a bass. Julia Grisi was the soprano. The tenor was Giovanni Battista Rubini, who was the most famous tenor of his day. And he was the tenor for whom Bellini wrote all of those roles that go all the way up to high F for tenor, which is just, I don't think there are any tenors who have that today. And the baritone was a fellow named Antonio Tamburini, about whom we know not too much, except for through reviews of the day, when he was just praised all the time for his, first of all, for his good looks, his extremely beautiful voice, the flexibility of his voice, the size of his voice, his acting ability, all of those things. He got praised and praised and praised and praised. Okay, that was the baritone. The bass in that production was Luigi Lablache. Luigi Lablache was his father. He was an Italian bass, but his father, of course, was French, and his mother was Irish. But he was born in Italy, and he was the most famous bass of the entire 19th century. He was bigger than life, actually, in stature, as well as size of voice as well. He had a tremendously flexible voice. He was extremely intelligent. He was a wonderful actor. Everything positive was said about Luigi Lablache. And here's the really interesting fact about Luigi Lablache that I just love. Luigi Lablache had music written for him by Rossini, Bellini, Donizetti, Verdi, and Schubert. I just love that.
It's a powerful group.
I just love that. So you know, he was a really great singer. So this quartet of singers in Puritani sang Puritani all over Europe. They sang it in Prague, they sang it in Paris, they sang it in London, they sang it in St. Petersburg, they sang it in Madrid, they sang it all over the place, till finally this quartet became known as the Puritani Quartet. When Giovanni Battista Rubini, the tenor in the quartet, retired, he was the oldest of the 4. His place was taken in the quartet by a fellow that sang under the name of Signor Mario. His real name was Mario De Candia, and the De Candias were sort of low-level aristocracy. And in those days, the aristocracy did not appear on the stage. And so in order not to embarrass his family in any way, he didn't use his last name, De Candia. He just sang under the name of, he just called himself Signor Mario. And he had a wonderful career, and he was quite good looking, and he was part of this quartet. He and Julia Grisi fell madly in love. They got married. They had a passel of children. They were totally, totally in love with each other, and stayed together and for the rest of their lives, and it was just wonderful. So this is what I call the Quartet of 5. My Quartet of 5 has the soprano Julia Grisi, 2 tenors Giovanni Battista Rubini and Signor Mario, a baritone Antonio Tamburini, and a bass Luigi Lablache. Here's a funny story, actually. Okay, I forgot to say. So this quartet of singers, without without Rubini in it, just Giulio Grisi, Signor Mario, Antonio Tamburini, and Luigi Lablache. Donizetti loved this quartet of singers so much, he wrote Don Pasquale for them, which I think is fascinating. And this sort of really got me going, because if Giulia Grisi by this time was singing Norma herself and was singing all of these big pieces, really lots of big pieces, then it means that if this is the type of voice that Donizetti expected to hear in Norina, then these little coloratures who sometimes sing Norina these days, that's not what he wanted. He wanted a real dramatic coloratura to sing that role. I think that's really interesting. So that's my quartet of five.
It's very interesting. I thank you. I have a number of questions for you today, which I haven't asked you. One of them I've asked you many times, but I'm going to ask you again.
I don't know. I haven't found out who's
We have to remember that Strepponi.
But I wanted to say, talk about singers singing repertoire that you wouldn't expect them to sing. This Signor Mario, who was the very first Ernesto in Don Pasquale, who sings, I think he has a high C sharp. He sings a high C sharp in that duet that he has with Norina in the last act. Mm-hmm. He also sang Manrico in Trovatore. What? What? I mean, no tenor who sings Ernesto today would sing Manrico and Trovatore. I don't think. Maybe Gregory Kunde.
Right. Not. Oftentimes, unfortunately, and I love singers, and we've talked about this. If we were alone, I might mention some names, but one of the things I've always felt very strongly about is I love singers, even the ones that perhaps I'm not in love with their voices. I love the art of singing, and I love singers, and I respect them, and I think it's very important to be aware of how hard they work and how much sacrifice they have in their lives, and not to trash them. And unfortunately, social media does a terrible job at keeping an eye on all that kind of thing, and it can be very negative and very hurtful, especially if the singer is still singing. I mean, some people post and just they're out to lunch. So I thought
of another singer who probably could have sung both Ernesto and Manrico as well, and that would have been Chris Merritt. He could have done it too.
Yes. Yeah.
Probably did.
You have me thinking of it's not a role that oftentimes is shared, but I'm trying to think if Domingo ever sang Ernesto, because he sang everything. He's sung so many roles, but he
never had the C sharp. He never had the C sharp.
Yeah.
But you can sort of doctor it and get around that if you switch the soprano and the tenor role just for a couple of phrases. You can get away with not singing the C sharp.
I have a question for you that's asked quite often, and there are various ways of answering this, but I'm going to ask you because I've never asked you this question. What is bel canto?
Bel canto. Well, bel canto, of course, literally means beautiful song, beautiful singing. I think that bel canto is somehow misnamed, however, because I think it should be called something like bella espressione or something like that, because clearly bel canto isn't always just about making a beautiful sound. It is also about being particularly expressive with text. And in a way, when bel canto came along, that's really the first time that people were caring a lot about the text in song. It's not so much about popular song. People always cared about the text in popular song, but not so much when it came to highfalutin stuff, I think. So what is bel canto? To me, bel canto is is about that beautiful expression of the text. It is about the beauty of the sound, and it's also about the flexibility of the sound. And it became something else right smack in the middle of the 19th century when Wagner came along. He didn't intend to change it. Wagner loved bel canto. Wagner respected Bellini tremendously, and all of those operas that Wagner wrote when he was in exile in Paris, Rienzi, for instance, and Lohengrin, for instance, they're both very Italianate pieces, very Italianate pieces. And he was spending all of his time at the Italian Opera. He was going to all the soirees with Rossini and Chopin and Liszt and all those guys, and they all went to the Italian Opera all the time. And so when Wagner came along, he loved singing, and he loved beautiful singing, and he loved flexibility in the voice. But he also loved the orchestra, and he loved to experiment with the orchestra, and he started playing around with it, and the orchestra started getting bigger and bigger, and he was maybe a little bit jealous of his friend Mr. Berlioz, who was they wanted to see who could get the biggest, and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So when the orchestra started to get bigger, they started making the opera houses a little bit bigger, just ever so gradually. So it came to the point where, instead of the priority being beauty of voice and flexibility of voice, the priority became the size of the voice and the stamina of the singer. And so it just changed. It just changed the dynamic tremendously in opera, whether you like it or not. That's what happened. So does that answer a question? Does that?
Does. So I'm going to ask you a question, go into a different room, so to speak. You brought back memories of when we were a long time ago, when you were living in Boston, and you played Electra for me. I still remember that. And I thought, what is this? And I had the Puccini and Verdi operas by that time, and my Barber of Seville and all of that. By the way, I think today is Rossini's birthday, if I'm not mistaken.
It is indeed.
So we'll dedicate this to
How about that?
Yes. And I remember having this experience of, you played the Ingeborg recording, and I was like, what is this? And I was thinking about how opera, it's so important to leave perhaps I'm speaking subjectively now, to be open to new experiences. And it really opened up. I was like, I love this music. What is this? And I hadn't heard it. I was probably 19 or 20 at that time, I guess, something like that.
Yeah. It was actually the Schulte recording with Birgit Nielsen that put Electra on the map, sort of, universally.
Right, but I think you played the Borg.
That recording wasn't out yet. This recording. It was Fritz Reiner recording. I think he was the conductor.
No, it was the Bern. It's the complete recording of Electra with Bern.
That's not what I played for you.
It isn't?
No.
My memory's slipping.
I don't think so.
The DG recording. I thought it was.
I don't think I had that recording at the time.
Okay.
I got it later, but I don't think I had it at the time. The recording that I played for you were selections where it was from Electra, and it was Ingeborg, Jean Madeira.
You're absolutely right.
Jean Madeira, and Francis Yend was the chrysotomist, and that was conducted by Fritz Reiner, and it was from Chicago.
Right. It was like a highlights, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, I do remember that now.
And there was another side to that record, and that was was also Strauss. What orchestral Strauss? I don't remember what it was anymore, but anyway. Ingeborg was a wonderful singer.
So exciting, really
I
exciting.
loved her. I was thinking about what else we might talk about today, and I was thinking that we might get into the area of young singers joining a tradition. And unfortunately, I find that so many of the young singers don't really understand what exactly is the tradition that they're joining. I remember once, not so very long ago, I was teaching a diction class, Italian diction or French diction, I'm not sure which. And one of the girls in my class said that she was so interested in listening to the old time singers. And I said, "Oh, that's wonderful." I expected that she was going to say that she listened to Nellie Melba or Emma Eames or Johanna Godsky or, Lillian Nordica or, some of those from, the early part of the 20th century. And she says, "Oh, yes, I just love Kiri Te Kanawa." I hope Kiri doesn't hear this. She is not going to want to know that was one of those old time singers. But anyway, so then that got me in that class that very year. I put together a little questionnaire. I put a list of singers, and I asked all the singers in this class to be very honest and to tell me whether they knew the names that here, to put a check mark beside the names that they knew. And the list came back almost blank. Almost blank. A voice teacher friend of mine recently said that one of her students had heard Birgit Nilsson for the very first time. Now, I mean, when you and I talk about Birgit Nilsson, it's like it was yesterday, right?
Mm-hmm.
I heard Birgit Nilsson so many times, and I'm sure you did too, live in the house. It was just unbelievable. But she sang her last performance at the Met in 1985. And that's a long time ago already.
But for people to
So
not
we
have
have some
heard of
educating
them.
to do.
But I think now I want to be careful because I don't want to go down this slippery slope, but I always feel it's subjective. What we love is always subjective, really, no matter what people say or do. I remember listening to this particular tenor in a recording of Norma going, "Oh, get me away from this. I can't do this." And I'm not going to say who it is because I'm moving into a new direction with that in my getting ready for my 9th decade of life. I don't want to say negative things about singers. It's not helpful.
Well, I
Observation
have
is
22
different.
recordings of Norma.
Yeah.
I have 22 recordings of Norma,
But-
and about 15 of them I want to say, "Oh, get me away from this."
But every once in a while, I think of a story. May I tell us a short story? I promise. Not that I am
Please,
short stories. I'm a
your
storyteller
podcast,
by heart. I
Howard.
can't stop. When Renata Scotto sang Lucia, early on in her career, she said, "I don't want blood on my dress. It's in the music." And then later on, when she was directing, she said she had the singer, and the singer had blood on her dress. And someone came up to her foolishly. If you knew Renata, you knew this was not a good question, although you got what you got. And she said, "I thought you said that it was in the music." She said, "I changed my mind." And I think I would put this out to anybody as a thought. I changed my mind. So I was listening to this tenor about 2 years ago, and I used to think, I can't listen to this man in anything, and he's on some live performances, whatever. I loved it, and I thought, what's wrong with me? And then I realized I'm not listening because it happened to be Puritani that I was listening to. Virginia Ziani was the soprano. She was wonderful. But the tenor, it was Mario Filippeschi. And I thought, he's really good. He has a good top, and it's not for the ages, maybe for everybody, but he's very expressive. Walter Legg thought he was a wonderful tenor. Otherwise, he wouldn't have chosen chosen him for the first Norma with Maria
Right.
Callas.
Yeah.
But I heard it differently, Benton. Is that possible?
Of
Yes. My
course. Of
life
course.
experiences have changed, and maybe I'm more loving than I used to be.
Well,
That's putting out,
yeah.
but I can also listen and go, it's a hard road. I hear it differently. I'm hearing the music differently. I'm a different person. So we change our minds, and I think that's okay. It doesn't mean that we have to love everyone, but
No, and but also Edgardo was a very different kind of role than Pollione. And so it's not, I mean, Pollione is a real heroic,
mhm.
it's really a big piece. And I don't remember his recording of it, but
I might be wrong, but I believe he never sang it on stage. But
that doesn't surprise me.
Walter Legg was no fool, and he chose him for a reason. So for whatever that reason, but I think the more important piece, which I think is maybe at the top of all of my feelings about this, is that it's very personal, and that our love for a singer or for a conductor or for the music is always subjective. And no matter how somebody else feels, no matter how much we love them or not love them, the person even, that's feeling this way, or the singer, it doesn't make any difference because it's all subjective. I
Right.
know that's really putting it
Sure.
all and it's stirring it up in the pot, but on some level, have you ever listened to something that has moved you deeply by a singer you don't like?
Yes.
Because it's about Benton. I mean, it's a thought. It's a
Isn't
thought.
everything?
But you know what I mean. This is like going back to the NEC again.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. And I was thinking, I came into possession of a photograph of a singer named Luca Botti. Have you ever heard that name before?
The name sounds familiar to me.
He was very well known right at the beginning of the 20th century. I don't think he ever recorded anything. I'm not sure about that at all.
Mm-hmm.
But he uh, I came into possession of this photograph of him, and there's just something about him. It's just such a sweet face, such a there's something really there's something just really wonderful about this photograph. I just love it. And I started reading about him, and everybody was talking about how wonderful he was. Anyway, he was having a wonderful success in his career. He was singing a lot at the at La Scala, and well, don't you know, he got cancer and died at the age of 35. And so I heard once upon a time, I think it was an Aztec saying or something. I don't know. Maybe I have that entirely wrong. But the story is this: we all die three times. The first time we die is when we realize that we're mortal and that we are going to die. That's when we die the first time.
Mm-hmm.
The second time we die is when we really die. The third time we die is when the last person says our name.
Absolutely.
And I like, there's something about that I like, and this is why I've gotten so interested in all of these old time singers, because I don't want to be the last person to say their name, So Luca Botti, I, I want to spread his knowledge. So that's why I started my collection, of photographs, autographed photos, and letters that they've written. My house is full of things like that. You
I
can
see some of them behind you.
see some of them
Yeah.
here.
Something we share, if I may say. Uh, I love some of the new singers, and I think it's so important to not, for me, and everyone is different. We make our own decisions.
Mhm.
I don't want to live in the past completely. And there are people like, oh, it's not like it used to be. Well, no, it isn't. These are different singers, and give them a chance and at least listen to them. And you listen
Yeah,
to them. You
yeah,
work with them. Never mind, listen
yeah,
with them.
yeah.
So,
Well, I think um, I've been really blessed. I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of great singers
You
for
have, you have.
60 years, actually, and that's just wonderful. Um, and then I keep working with young singers, and and a lot of them are really good, and I think they might
Mhm.
develop into something really wonderful in the long run. But then sometimes I'm just delighted about this. Sometimes a singer, I'll just choose one, Lisa Davidson, for instance.
Mhm.
Lisa Davidson, I mean, she is a force of nature. This is really quite extraordinary, I think. And there are a few others like her, you know, coming along, coming up,
Absolutely.
and uh, yeah.
It's there are I love it. I love talking to you about this, and I'm sure there are listeners and people who are watching this who have somewhat the same feelings or the same feelings. There's something about going to the theater. I love recordings. I have many recordings like you. We collected them. I have many, many memories. Remember Uta Graf? I still celebrate her because somebody has to remember her name because she was special. But beyond all of that, it's always wonderful to hear a new voice.
Let's make a list of all those singers that young singers should know about
I
that they
think that
probably
sounds like a
don't.
plan. I think that sounds like a plan. The I don't like the word unforgotten or forgotten, but I think that we need to use something like that.
Mhm.
Singers. So we'll stir it in the pot and decide.
There's a
Not to be
fascinating
forgotten.
group of singers that uh, dramatic sopranos who fell into the cracks between Kirsten Flogstad and Birgit Nielsen.
Hmm.
There's so many wonderful dramatic sopranos who were between there, who they weren't Kirsten Flogstad and they weren't Birgit Nielsen, and therefore they tend to people they just fell through the cracks.
Yeah,
And no people. Inga Borg is one of those
yeah,
people,
I would
one of
agree.
those sopranos actually.
Yeah,
Astrid Varnay and Helen Traubel and Margaret Harshaw.
and even Antonella Stella, who really
Yes,
was a
yes,
great,
Antonella
great,
Stella.
great
That's right.
singer. Who she was between between Maria Callas and Renata Tebaldi, and they recorded a lot. She recorded roles. They both recorded quite
Yeah,
often, and she was a fabulous singer. Really,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I think Collis was supposed to record Traviata, and then
yeah.
something happened.
That
Somebody got
wasn't
mad at
good.
somebody, and that
She
led to
couldn't get out of the.
that
She had
recording.
recorded it for Chetra, and there was a contractual problem. Although she, of course, I love Maria Callas, as you know, but she was very angry about that. But she had recorded it with Chetra with a number of years ago at Santini. So Sardathian had to use somebody else, and he used Stella. And then she was angry about that, Maria. She got over it, but
But she was wrong at the wrong person. She was angry at the wrong person. She shouldn't have been angry with
that
Stella. She
never
should have been
happens in
angry with.
life. I can't. I'm so surprised. Just that. Thank you so much, Benton Hess. You've
It's
been
such a
delightful
pleasure.
today. You're delightful. Please tune in on for other podcasts with Benton and myself on Speaking Opera. You'll find it on speakingopera.com, my website, on YouTube, Speaking Opera channel, and on Facebook. You'll find links as well, and Instagram, all in Speaking Opera. Thank you, Benton Hess.
Thank you, Howard.
Ciao.
Yeah.
Speaking Opera focuses on documenting the career activities of currently active singers, composers, musicians, and authors in the field of operatic performance and scholarship, and specialists in the field of audio recording, as well as those who have retired fully or partially from performing and/or teaching. Under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976, Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.